In the photographs taken minutes before the tragedy, smiling faces are visible. Someone waves a hand. Someone looks slightly excited. It is their first hot air balloon flight, after all. Typical tourist photography. None of them knows yet what will happen in half an hour. February 26th, 2013, early morning. A group of about 20 people was preparing to embark on a flight over Egyptian Luxor. 19 tourists, a guide, and a pilot. 21 people. And each of them woke up that day with the feeling that something special lay ahead. Out there, amidst the desert and sun-scorched stones, lie ancient tombs and temples, the burial places of people who believed that death is only a transition. A strange irony, if you think about it. For most passengers, this flight was supposed to be the main highlight of the entire trip, that very moment for which people travel anywhere at all. Soaring over the Valley of the Kings, against the backdrop of the rising sun, it sounds like the final scene of a good movie. Only the finale turned out to be completely different. Just minutes after takeoff, the irreparable would happen, and almost none of them would ever step on the ground again. Ancient Luxor stands on the east bank of the Nile. Once, this city was called Thebes, one of the capitals of ancient Egypt. Here, rulers and nobility built underground tombs, carving corridors into the rocks that went down dozens of meters.
They built temples on such a scale that even now, millennia later, you stand before them and don't understand how. How was this even possible? Columns as high as a multi-story building, bas-reliefs where animal-headed gods lead pharaohs into the underworld, hieroglyphs carved so deep that neither wind nor sand nor time have erased them. Today, Luxor is one of the country's main tourist destinations. Thousands of people come here every year to see what remains of the ancient civilization, to walk between the columns of the Karnak temple where the echo of footsteps is lost somewhere under the ceiling, to descend into the tomb of Tutankhamun, a narrow corridor, stuffiness, the smell of old stone and paint that still hasn't faded, and, of course, to rise into the sky. Local companies have long put balloon tours on a production line. Every day, 5 to 7 balloons rise over Luxor. The first one starts before sunrise, so that tourists can see the sun crawl out from behind the horizon and flood the ancient stones with gold. It costs money, it looks incredible in photos, and it is, to be honest, quite dangerous, though people prefer not to think about that, neither tourists nor operators. Specialists classify ballooning as an extreme form of recreation. It's not an airplane or a helicopter. There's no engine in the traditional sense, no steering wheel, no way to sharply change course or go for a second lap if something goes wrong.
The air inside the envelope is heated by a gas burner. It's installed right in the center of the passenger basket, over people's heads. An open flame, heat from which you have to turn away when the pilot turns the burner to full power. Gas cylinders under your feet, several of them, connected by hoses, and a thin nylon fabric between you and the sky. Essentially, the main control tool is the pilot's head, his experience, his intuition, the ability to read the wind from the clouds and smoke from fires below, working the burner and valves, feeling when the balloon starts to behave differently, understanding where you can land and where you can't. Everything rests on one person. And when this person makes a mistake, or when the equipment fails him, the loss becomes catastrophic, because there is no roadside in the air, no way to stop and figure things out. You either handle it or you don't. That day, around 5 in the morning, 19 tourists left their hotels. It was still dark, cool as it ever gets in Egypt in February. The temperature was about 15 degrees, but after a night in an air-conditioned room, it felt cold. People yawn, shiver,
wrap themselves in light jackets, but anticipation can already be read in their eyes. That special expression people have when they are waiting for something they've long dreamed of. Among them, 9 residents of Hong Kong, 5 women, 4 men. Some came as a family, some with friends. 2 elderly married couples from Japan, neat, polite, with small cameras around their necks. Perhaps they were celebrating an anniversary, as often happens. 40 years together, 50, and so they decided to give themselves a gift, to see the world from above. 3 Britons, 2 French, 1 woman from Hungary. She was traveling alone, which in itself requires a certain amount of courage. Different countries, different languages, different lives. But on this morning, they all found themselves in one place, standing by the bus, waiting for the others to gather, looking at the stars that hadn't yet faded. At about 6 o'clock, the group received a briefing, standard procedure, where to hold on, how to stand in the basket, what to do during landing. Hold on to the rails, bend your knees, don't panic if the balloon tilts. Everything is under control. People listened with half an ear. It's always like that before something exciting. Their heads are already up there, in the sky. Their eyes are already looking for the colorful canopies being prepared for launch. One by one, the tourists climbed into the basket. Inside, there were several compartments separated by woven rattan partitions. Each held 3 to 4 people. A bit cramped, elbow to elbow, but tolerable. Everyone understood it wasn't for long. A couple from Scotland, 49-year-old Michael Rennie and his 48-year-old wife Yvonne, stood side by side, talking quietly about something.
He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the weathered face of a man who loves being outdoors. She was a bit shorter than his shoulder, in a warm jacket with her hair in a ponytail. For them, this was already their second balloon flight. They knew what to expect. They knew that feeling when the ground begins to recede, first slowly, almost imperceptibly, and then you suddenly realize the trees have become small and the people below have turned into dots. And you're hanging in the air, and nothing holds you except the hot air in the canopy above your head. Only fabric and physics. Maybe that's why they came back. For that feeling. For the sense that the laws of gravity can be cheated. Another couple, 40-year-old Briton Joe Benton and his 27-year-old girlfriend Susanna Guy, were going up for the first time. Susanna was nervous, it was obvious. She held tight to the edge of the basket even though the balloon was still on the ground. She looked down, then up at the huge canopy swaying above them. Joe held her hand, said something, smiled, probably reassuring her, probably promising that everything would be okay, that it's safe, that thousands of people do this every day. He was the kind of man who always knows what to say, the kind next to whom you feel protected. At 6:15 a.m., the Ultramagic N425 model hot air balloon lifted off the ground. The operating company was called Sky Cruise. A beautiful name, a promise of something light, serene, vacation-like.
There were 21 people on board. The passengers waved goodbye to those who remained below. Company employees, drivers, random onlookers who had come to watch the launch. Someone was filming. Someone just watched as the colorful canopy slowly rose into the pre-dawn sky. The burner roared, throwing out pillars of flame. The balloon gained altitude. The earth receded. First hotels and palm trees, then fields irrigated with Nile water, even green rectangles amidst the beige desert. Then the Nile itself, a wide gray ribbon dividing the world into 2 parts, living and dead, green and stone. The balloon reached altitude and moved over the ancient monuments as scheduled. Temples, colonnades, remnants of walls 3,500 years old floated below. Huge statues half buried in sand. Tomb entrances, black rectangles in the hillsides. The sun rose,
and the stones began to glow, first pink, then gold, then dazzlingly white. Tourists took photos, turned their heads, pointed things out to each other, talked in different languages, and each was certain that they specifically were seeing something special. The guide named the monuments: Medinet Habu, the Ramesseum, the Colossi of Memnon. Words most would forget in a week, but the feeling would remain. The entire excursion was supposed to take about half an hour, 30 minutes of beauty, 30 minutes for which people had flown across half the world.
The balloon traveled more than 8 kilometers, drifting toward the desert. The monuments were left behind. Below now were fields, sugarcane, wheat, some vegetables. Ordinary countryside. The pilot began preparing for landing. Moment Murat, that was his name, contacted the ground crew via radio. His voice was calm, businesslike. He had done this hundreds of times. He reported coordinates: an open area near agricultural lands, a good spot, level, no wires or trees, safe, or so it seemed. The chase car, an old pickup truck with an open bed, moved into position. The pilot began the descent. The balloon lowered slowly, smoothly, as it should. The passengers felt the pressure change in their ears, how the ground became closer, more detailed. One could already see individual plants, furrows in the field, people looking up. Murat dropped the mooring line, a thick rope the ground crew was to use to pull the balloon to the ground. The rope fell like a snake into the dust. The time was 6:50. 10 people from the ground team grabbed the cable, strong men in work clothes, tanned, accustomed to physical labor. They began to pull, slowly, smoothly, as required. Step by step, the basket descended, meter by meter. The passengers were already preparing for the jolt, the moment when the bottom of the basket touches the ground, and it all ends. 3 meters from the ground, maybe a bit less. One could already make out the faces of the people below, their smiles, their strained arms on the rope.
It already seemed that it was over. A few more seconds, and the passengers would begin to climb out of the basket, stretch their stiff legs, exchange impressions, look for their phones to write to their families, share photos. And then the gas pipe of the burner burst. The sound was sharp, not an explosion, more like a pop, dull, unpleasant, as if something had burst under pressure. And immediately, flame. It erupted from the point of the break, from the connection where the hose was attached to the burner. Not a small tongue of fire, no, a pillar of flame that instantly engulfed the center of the basket. Heat struck their faces. It smelled of burnt plastic, fabric, something else. It all happened so fast that people didn't even have time to understand what was happening. Someone screamed. Someone instinctively recoiled to the edge of the basket. The pilot, Moment Murat, was the first to be hit. He stood closest to the burner, where a pilot is supposed to stand. A shockwave of hot air, followed by flame. The flames licked his clothes, and they caught fire. Synthetics burned fast. At that moment, perhaps instinctively, perhaps in panic, or maybe it was the only decision his brain had time to make, he vaulted over the side of the basket and jumped down. 3 meters. He fell to the ground, engulfed in flames. He rolled in the dust, trying to beat out the fire. A second later, one of the passengers followed him, Michael Rennie.
The Scotsman who had already flown in a balloon and knew that you shouldn't jump, that you need to stay in the basket, that the pilot will handle it. But when there is fire around you, when the heat burns your face and you can't breathe, and it's only 3 meters down, there is no time to think. The body decides for you. He jumped. Then everything fell apart. Part of the ground crew saw the pilot was on fire. A man was rolling on the ground, his clothes ablaze. They dropped the rope and rushed to him to beat out the flames with jackets, hands, whatever they could. It was a right human impulse, a normal reaction of normal people. And it was a catastrophe. Because those remaining, 4 or 5 people, could not hold the balloon. The ropes slipped from their hands,
or they were ripped away by force, or they simply let go in panic. Who can say now? The hot air balloon, with its basket on fire, with people inside, shot upward. It's physics. Simple, ruthless physics. Hot air rises. When flames engulf the envelope, the air inside heats up even more, much more than from the burner. The balloon doesn't fall. The balloon takes off. Fast, uncontrollably, and it's impossible to stop it. Up there is no pilot. No one who can release pressure, open a valve, do anything at all. Only fire and 19 people trapped in a woven basket. Michael Rennie stood on the ground, burned, stunned, in torn clothes, and watched his wife drift away into the sky. Yvonne remained in the basket.
She was there, up there, amidst the fire and smoke. He saw her, or he thought he saw her, a dark silhouette against the flame, and he could do nothing. Nothing. He ran 200 meters after the balloon, stumbling over clumps of earth, pushing through some bushes, screaming at the top of his lungs, "My wife! My wife!" His voice cracked, his lungs burned, not from fire, but from running and screaming. But the balloon rose faster than he could run, much faster. It was like a nightmare, when you run with all your might, but cannot catch up. As the balloon gained altitude, 20 meters, 30, 50, 70, several people decided on a desperate move. They jumped from the burning basket down into the sugarcane field. It wasn't a choice in the usual sense. It was instinct. Fire behind, void below, and you jump because the fire is more terrifying. 5 or 6 people. No one will ever establish the exact number. From such a height, 50, 60 meters, there is almost no chance of survival, but almost is not completely. One of those who jumped was Joe Benton, the same Briton who an hour ago had held his girlfriend's hand and promised that everything would be okay, that it was safe, that thousands of people do this every day. Susanna remained in the basket. She didn't jump. Maybe she didn't have time. It all happened too fast. Maybe she couldn't bring herself to. The fear of heights can be stronger than the fear of fire. Maybe she hoped someone would do something.
That it would stop. That it couldn't happen like this. Not to her, not today. Not on an ordinary Tuesday in February. 15 seconds passed. Maybe 20. Time flows strangely in such moments. For those below, it stretches. For those in the basket, it probably collapses into a point. The flame flared brighter. The fire reached the gas cylinders standing at the bottom of the basket. The balloon reached the 300-meter mark. That's the height of a 100-meter building times 3. It's a height from which the city looks like a model, and people like ants. And then the gas cylinder exploded. The explosion was powerful. It was heard kilometers away. The balloon envelope, that entire huge, colorful sphere that a minute ago had floated over the temples of the pharaohs, which had been photographed from other balloons and from the ground, turned into shreds of charred fabric. Pieces of material flew in all directions, circling in the air like ash from a giant bonfire. The remains of the balloon and the basket with people plunged down. 300 meters of free fall. 6 seconds. 6 seconds during which the surviving passengers fell toward the earth. What were they thinking in those seconds? What did they manage to remember? It is impossible to know. Impossible even to imagine. When rescuers arrived at the scene, they saw a field strewn with debris. Black spots on the green stalks of sugarcane. Charred fragments of fabric that were still smoking.
Bent gas cylinders scattered over an area of 100 meters. Pieces of the woven basket, the same rattan weave that an hour ago seemed so reliable. And bodies. 18 people died on the spot. Some burned while still in the air. Some died in the fall. Some were killed by both. Rescuers walked through the field, marking the places where the remains lay with flags. The police arrived, then the military, then journalists. A helicopter circled over the crash site. It was no longer a rescue. It was an accounting of what had happened. 3 were taken to the hospital. The pilot, Momin Murat, the one who jumped first, even before the balloon took off, was alive but in critical condition. Severe burns to his arms, face, and chest. Shock. He could barely speak, barely breathe. Doctors didn't know if he would survive. Joe Benton, who jumped from a height of about 50 meters, miraculously reached the hospital alive. He was in surgery for 5 hours. Doctors did everything possible, but his body couldn't hold on. Too many fractures, too many internal injuries. He never regained consciousness. Of the 3, only Michael Rennie survived. The only one who jumped in time, from 3 meters, following the pilot. The only one who made a decision in that split second when it still made sense. He sat in the hospital ward and cried. Not from pain, though the burns on his hands were serious. From understanding. His wife, Yvonne, was dead.
The very woman he had been standing with in the basket, talking quietly just minutes before the disaster. The one who held his elbow as the balloon lifted off the ground. The one for whom he had probably agreed to this second flight. She stayed there. She didn't jump. Or she didn't have time. Or he didn't have time to pull her out. He will think about this for the rest of his life. Why he jumped alone. Why he didn't grab her hand. Why it all happened so fast that he didn't even have time to turn around. These questions have no answers, but they won't go away. The final seconds of the hot air balloon's existence were filmed by several people. Someone filmed from the ground, a local farmer who happened to have a phone in his hands. Someone else from on board another aerostat that was also in the air at that moment, half a kilometer from the site of the tragedy. The passengers of that balloon saw everything. They saw their neighbors in the sky burning and falling. They saw dark specks separate from the basket. Those were people jumping. They saw the explosion. They saw everything collapse downward. And they continued to film. Because in shock, people do strange things. In the recording, everything looks almost unreal, like a special effect from a disaster movie. The balloon, engulfed in flames, rises slowly. From the ground it seems slow, though in reality it was very fast. Then a flash. Then black smoke. Then the fall. The entire tragedy unfolded in just over 2 minutes.
130 seconds from the first pop to the impact with the ground. 130 seconds that changed everything. Momin Murat was considered an experienced pilot, about 10 years in ballooning. He was known in Luxor. He was trusted. Tourists specifically asked for him. Colleagues respected him. He had flown hundreds of hours and safely landed balloons in all sorts of conditions, in strong winds, in poor visibility, on restricted sites. And then, one malfunction, one burst hose, and 10 years of experience were worth nothing. After the disaster, the provincial governor banned all hot air balloon flights. The aerostats stood on the ground, tied to trucks, looking like deflated toys. An investigation began. Investigators arrived from Cairo, aviation accident experts, representatives of the Ministry of Tourism. Accusations flew. Everyone blamed everyone. The head of the local tourism chamber pointed the finger at the Civil Aviation Authority. Officials don't check the equipment. They issue licenses for bribes. They turn a blind eye to violations. The authorities responded that the balloon had recently passed inspection, that all documents were in order, that the pilot should have shut off the valves and put out the fire rather than jumping overboard, that he himself aggravated the situation by abandoning the passengers. Everyone was looking for someone to blame.
Everyone wanted a simple explanation. One name, one decision, one mistake to point to and say, there, it's him. It's because of him.
but there are no simple explanations in such stories. There never are. Local hot air balloon operators were furious, not because of the dead, though probably because of them too, because of the money, because of the business. One of the company owners told journalists, "You will deprive 3,000 people of their livelihoods. 3,000 families live off this business. Pilots, mechanics, drivers, souvenir sellers. What are they to do?" He was right, and the 18 people who died that morning were also someone's families. They also had relatives waiting for them at home, who are still waiting. The ministry promised that the grounding would last no more than a month. Tourism is money. Money is more important than memory. Money is more important than fear. A few weeks later, the balloons rose into the sky over Luxor again, over the same temples, over the same Valley of the Kings, with new tourists who also wanted to see the sunrise from a height, who perhaps didn't even know what had happened here. On January 7th, 2014, almost a year after the disaster, Egypt's Civil Aviation Authority published the final report, a dry technical document of several dozen pages, diagrams, graphs, tables, and the conclusion: the cause of the fire was a fuel leak due to a malfunction in the gas hose connection. The hose was manufactured in 2005.
8 years of operation, sometimes in harsh conditions. Temperature fluctuations, from the night cold to the midday heat. Vibration during transport. Gas pressure. Wear and tear. Micro cracks, invisible to the naked eye. Defects that accumulate over months and years, and then make themselves known in an instant. One rupture, and that's it. There was something else in the report. The pilot did not notify the airport control service before takeoff. A formal violation, a checkbox that wasn't checked. One of many minor violations that happen every day and usually lead to nothing. But when something goes wrong, every such checkbox becomes a point of accusation. Investigators questioned Murat in a military hospital. He lay in the burn unit, wrapped in bandages like a mummy. He spoke with difficulty, lips burned, throat damaged by smoke. He claimed he couldn't determine the source of the fire, that he tried to grab a fire extinguisher but was thrown back by the heat, that he didn't smell gas, though how can you smell anything when everything around you is burning, that he fell out of the basket in an unconscious state. He didn't even understand how he ended up on the ground. He insisted that checking the hose was not his duty, but that of the maintenance engineer, that he is a pilot, not a mechanic, that he cannot disassemble the burner before every flight, that he trusted the equipment, as he had trusted it for 10 years.
The prosecutor's office countered. Both the pilot and the technician failed to conduct a proper pre-flight inspection. Both should have inspected the equipment. Both failed to do so. Both are to blame. Or no one is to blame. Or the system is to blame. A system in which worn-out equipment remains in operation for years because it's expensive to replace, and there's no one to check it. A system in which everyone relies on maybe, and usually maybe works. And then, one time, it doesn't. Here is what else came to light during the investigation. This specific balloon had already been in an accident. In October 2011, a year and a half before the disaster, it nearly crashed into the roof of a hotel in Luxor. Something went wrong with the controls. The balloon descended too sharply, nearly snagging the building. Then it fell into the Nile. Passengers floundered in the water. They were pulled out by boats. Everyone escaped with only a fright and wet clothes. The company Sky Cruise paid them compensation, a small amount so they wouldn't sue. The balloon was pulled out of the river, dried, repaired, and put back into operation. They could have stopped then. They could have decommissioned the equipment, conducted a serious inspection of all components, and asked themselves, is everything okay? How much longer will this balloon fly? Isn't it time to buy a new one? But business is business. The balloon flew, the money rolled in. The tourists were happy.
And a year and a half later, 18 people burned alive or crashed to the ground. A hot air balloon flight is beautiful, truly beautiful. You soar above the world and everything below seems small
and unimportant. Problems, fears, hustle, all of that remains down there on the ground. And you are here, in the sky, in the silence. Only the sound of the wind and occasional bursts of the burner. Temples built by people who have long since become dust. A river that has flowed here for thousands of years and will flow when we are gone. The sun rising above the horizon, as it rose under the pharaohs, the Romans, the Arabs, under everyone who has ever lived on this land. But behind this beauty, something always hides. A worn hose that should have been replaced long ago. An inattentive technician who didn't notice a crack. A pilot who relied on luck. A gust of wind at an unfortunate moment. Or just bad luck. The kind that is impossible to predict and impossible to insure against. It comes without warning. It doesn't choose who is good or who is bad. It just happens. The people in those photographs, taken minutes before the tragedy, are smiling, waving their hands, hugging, taking photos of themselves against the background of the colorful canopy, posting to social media, writing captions, "Best day of the vacation," "Dream come true," "Luxor from a bird's eye view." They don't know what awaits them. It's always like that. We never know.